I have 9 minutes after 5, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. And Adam, if you want to start the recording or is doing that.
Yep, it is starting to record.
All right, so welcome everybody. Hopefully you can all hear. And this is our very first virtual open house, neighborhood open house. So welcome. We'll try and get through this as best as possible. We may have a few glitches, but we'll try and work those out again as best as possible. This is also considered a work session for the City Council. So with that, I'm going to call the meeting to order, and I'm also going to not going to ask people to weigh it to say yes, they're here, but I'm just going to read the names for the record of staff and council members that are present. So staff present, we have Mike Baroni, our city administrator. We have Ali Paulfus, our administrative assistant. And then we have Brian Grimm, our finance director. We have Gary Peters, our Public Works Superintendent. Chris Lindquist is our city clerk. We have also Allison Fauski, who is with WSB and one of our city engineer. And as you've heard, Adam Gadbois, who is also with WSB, and he's going to be hosting this event tonight. Also council present are Shannon Bruce, Mike Molitor, John Chumperland, and Pam Mortensen. And I am here as well, the mayor, Lisa Whalen. And what we're going to do, this is one of the steps that we've added to our procedures here. Whenever there's a for a specific neighborhood, we do an open house, invite people to come in. In this method, it's attending via virtual, and we are going to be doing a presentation and telling you what the process is, what the project is, also giving you some estimates on costs. And of course, we're going to be opening it up for you to ask questions and give us some of your feedback as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Gadbois. Adam?
Perfect. Thank you, Madam Mayor, for the introduction and giving a brief overview of what we're going to be presenting this evening. Again, we really appreciate the residents attending this meeting virtually. We love to get together with you folks in person and talk about these projects. Unfortunately, with the circumstances, this is how we're going to do it. And so thank you for being patient as we go through it. Hopefully it goes off without a hitch, but if there are some glitches, just bear with us on those. And as a reminder, this whole presentation is going to be recorded. If you have neighbors that weren't able to attend, you can let them know that it's on the website and they can review it at their leisure. And of course, along the way, we have contact information for myself and the city engineer and other folks at city staff if there are any questions about the project. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen to our presentation. Which is probably going to be a little slow here briefly. All right, perfect. It looks like it's going to be a little slow, so bear with me as we click through this. This is the neighborhood meeting for the 2021 Street Improvement Project. It's been listed as City Project 02-21. Looks like I've got this scrolling wheel. Well, this gives an opportunity for some more people to join us here. Perfect. All right, so I'll be your host. I'll be the main one presenting here. Adam Gadbois, as Mayor Whalen mentioned, I'm the assistant city engineer for Minnetrista. I've been here for a few years along with Allison Fauski. She's on the line as well, and maybe some of you have communicated with her already about the project. She too will be heavily involved. We have the council members and city staff, and then a moderator, Lydia with WSB, that's helping out as well. So if you have questions, you can chat in the Q&A feature, which I'll go over here, and you'll be communicating with Lydia, and she can help you out if there are any questions. At the end of the presentation is when we'll go through those questions, and we'll be able to answer your questions. You'll be able to unmute and present your question to staff and council, and then we can provide a response. There's a raise hand function if you're on a computer, and if you're on just your phone, you can raise your hand with by typing *9. But we won't really get to those until the end of the presentation here. If you wish not to speak, you can always email our moderator. Her email is on the screen here. I'll leave it up for just a few more seconds in case you want to jot that down. And we'll mute and unmute as needed. And again, like I mentioned, this is all going to be available on the city's website. So that's the housekeeping items for this webinar. So let's get into the project. We have 3 slides here with project location maps, as we are a little bit geographically dispersed with the project this year in coming up in 2021. The first area you see here presented is Hardscrabble Circle and Hardscrabble Road, the neighborhood just east of County Road 44. So that's one project area. Just south of there, still off of County Road 44, is Loring Drive, and south a little bit further is Stonebridge Road. Then we jump over to we'll go north from here to a different part of town. Another street that is included in the 2021 project is Minneapolis Avenue, which is just west of County Road 19. All right, so how did this project get started? Why is the city working to improve roads? Kind of the main driving factor behind this is the capital improvement plan, and just the direction that city staff and city council want to move the city forward in order to improve the city. And from this standpoint, it would be improving the street and the street conditions throughout the community to provide safe and convenient and cost-effective way for residents to get around town. Prior to even determining what streets are included in a project, we do look at the city as a whole and address all of the bituminous streets, so that's your asphalt streets, and we look at their condition and score them based on a pavement condition index, which addresses a number of factors about the road and then basically gives it a score. And we look at that score and we say, all right, these roads need maintenance procedures done, or these roads actually need to be reconstructed or included in a improvement project. So the other thing we do when we're looking at putting a project together is also look at what's underneath the roadway. Does the city have water main and sanitary sewer and storm sewer facilities, and what's the condition of those facilities? We'd like to only disturb residents, as little as possible. And so when we're in a neighborhood improving the pavement and the streets, we do want to address any public utilities that have issues or need improvements, so we don't have to come in years later and affect the residents again. So we also assess what the utilities look like in these neighborhoods. When we're looking at these projects, this, of course, funding is a big factor, and the city has an assessment policy. And so what that policy does is it follows a state statute that describes how cities can get funding for a project. And basically they can do that by assessing a portion of the costs to the property owners that benefit from the improvement. So what that entails is city staff, engineering staff are required to put forth a feasibility report and conduct preliminary design. And as part of that, we're meeting with residents tonight. We've been speaking with residents coming up to this meeting. and gathering information. And then we also go out and do a survey of the project and put together opinions of probable cost and proposed improvements in this report that is then presented to the city council. So that's a requirement in order to assess the benefiting property owners. After the feasibility report is accepted by the city council, there is a public hearing that orders the project. You as residents will be invited to that public hearing as well. And if the council chooses, then they would authorize the preparation of plans and specifications for the project, and we'd really at that point get into the design and actually creating the bid package to provide to a contractor. So long-winded project background there. Let's talk about your specific streets. So let me minimize my video here so I can see. So as we look at the existing conditions, you folks are driving these roads day in and day out, and you know that the bituminous, it's another word for asphalt, that material is starting to fail, or it has been failing. There are cracking in the form of alligator cracks where it's kind of just looks kind of like an alligator's back. It's really all kind of falling apart. There's transverse cracking where there's large cracks across the roadway, and altogether the pavement structure for all of the streets proposed in this project is structurally deficient, and it does need to be removed in order to be improved. So there's no maintenance work that can really provide a long-lasting solution. You'll notice that Public Works staff over the years has done a great job of patching these streets as best as they can, but that only works to a certain extent, and it can become expensive and costly, and so that also gets factored into deciding when these streets are ready to be improved. I mentioned the pavement condition index a couple slides ago, and on average, if you look at all the streets proposed in this project, it's 47. And what that tells us is that's pretty poor, and it does need to be removed and replaced with new pavement. The other thing you see is, I think I can click through. Yeah, I've got some other photos. So that was Loring. This is a shot from Minneapolis Avenue. You can see we've got these areas that have sediment buildup, and what that shows is there's water pooling on the street. It's not necessarily draining properly, and that is bad for a number of reasons. It can saturate your boulevard, so you have trouble using your lawn, which we don't want to hear. And it also actually furthers the process of the breakdown of the street. So drainage is key, and a lot of these streets, I think we have hardscrabble next. There's an example of the alligator cracking that I was referring to. We do want to address those areas of poor drainage as well. As far as the utilities under these streets, it varies quite a bit based on what project area you live in. There's pretty much sanitary sewer throughout all these neighborhoods, or there is. There is a force main on Hardscrabble Road North. It's about 1,000 feet long, and with this project, we do want to improve that pipe by replacing it. So there will be work on Hardscrabble Road North and a portion of Hardscrabble Circle where we want to improve the sanitary sewer force main. There's some water main in the Stonebridge Road area, and historically what we've done is done some work at the hydrant and valve locations, perhaps to eliminate some corrosion or reduce some corrosion, or also to make the system function a little better. Maybe there needs to be a gate valve so that we don't affect as many residents when we do have to shut down water. So we look at that and propose those improvements to the water main. And then a big one is the storm sewer facilities. You know, all these streets are not, they don't have curb and gutter, but there is some storm sewer. And those storm sewers are kind of in disrepair. And so we look at the condition of those. We determine if they need to be repaired or replaced. And then we also will be looking at the site as a whole and look at drainage in different rain events and determine if additional storm sewer is needed to help address the drainage on each of these project areas. So the big component to this project is pavement reclamation. And we've done this in the city of Minnetrista for a number of years. And it's somewhat of a sustainable way to reconstruct a road in the fact that it's actually going to reuse some of the existing materials on site for the new road. So you can see on the picture here, that's what a reclaimer looks like, and it pulverizes the existing pavement that's kind of in really poor shape and actually blends it with what gravel that's underneath the pavement. Creates this recycled material, and that recycled material is then used as the new gravel that the new pavement goes over the top of. So just kind of a cool feature. We do like to explain this process at these neighborhood meetings so you have an idea of kind of how that pavement's being reconstructed. So let's talk specifically about the pavement and about the street improvements. Just for reference, on the right of your screen there is Duchesne Lane, which was recently part of the 2019 street improvement project, and just a shot of what that pavement looked like after it was completed. This is an area where it was a rural section with some ditches, and you can see there's some minor concrete curb there at the low point. But as we look at the neighborhoods included in the 2021 project, the goal is to really keep the geometry of the roads very similar. So we're not proposing to change street widths. That's kind of outside of the scope. So if you look at the width of the street, that's essentially what it's going to be. And along with the width, as you look at the grade of the street, so when it drops down and goes back up, we don't really plan on adjusting those. If you change those too much, it really affects how the street grades into your lawns and your landscaping, and we don't want to affect that too much. We will make minor adjustments as needed just to improve drainage at low points, and we can make some minor tweaks without being too impactful to your yards. One big topic is going to be whether or not there is a need for curbing or a desire for curbing on each street from the residents. So I'll briefly mention that now. The curb can be bituminous or concrete, and there can be a desire for both and functions for both. There's obviously a cost difference between the bituminous and concrete, and I think we'll touch on that a little bit later. But a lot of these streets right now, if we go back and talk about how their existing conditions, they really don't have curb, or they might have some bituminous curb, like Stonebridge has a bituminous curb. There might be some minor bituminous curb on some of the other streets, but it's not a wholesale curbed street at this time. So the street will be reconstructed, and then behind the street, obviously, we've got your yards. Those will be reestablished with seed, and that may be in the form of hydro seed or sod if needed. So at the end of the project, you will have your yard restored right up to the street. So we mentioned utilities. The picture on your right there is a picture of water main, and the picture is taken from about 6 or 7 feet up, and those are folks working on installing that new water main, which you can see is PVC. And so, of course, we're not replacing water main, but it's very similar type work when you're talking about sanitary sewer. And it kind of gives you a visual there that these pipes are anywhere from 5 to 6 to 7, 8 feet below the pavement surface. And so there will be big equipment on hardscrabble for sure installing that new main. If it is determined that open trench is needed, the other option that will be considered in feasibility is actually drilling that pipe, and so there's a lot less impact to the surface. So we will evaluate that as we go forward with the design. There's some manholes in the roadway. Those will get adjusted so that they are smooth, and when you drive over them, you don't necessarily feel a big pothole. And then the water main on Stonebridge, there'll be, like I mentioned, some work at the valves and the hydrants, and of course adjusting any any water main components that are in the roadway, again, to meet that new layer of pavement nicely so that you don't necessarily feel it when you're driving over it. This is a picture on the right here of what storm sewer looks like, and storm sewer, as I mentioned, conveys that drainage from rain events. So that's typically a reinforced concrete pipe and reinforced concrete structure. So you can see an image there of what that'll look like. We have some storm sewer on the project. Hardscrabble has a few culverts that we're going to assess the condition of and likely replace those crossings as needed. In other areas, such as Loring, at the low point on Loring Drive, there'll be a need to likely add some storm sewer to make sure that we can capture all the drainage necessary. Same with Minneapolis Avenue, and likely at Stonebridge, as you kind of approach County Road 44, there might be some work there, and then in the southerly cul-de-sac on Stonebridge. So we will be looking at, from a design standpoint, where these structures are warranted, and also the condition of the existing structures to see if they need to be replaced. One other item that we will be reviewing with preliminary design and feasibility report will be rain gardens or other drainage management features, because there wasn't really a whole lot of ponding in any of these neighborhoods, or if there's not an opportunity to connect to it. So there might be an opportunity to install rain gardens, particularly Hardscrabble Road North. There's a low point there for those residents who are familiar by the city's lift station, and there's no real place for the drainage to go. So that location would be somewhere we'd look at implementing a drainage management feature to help solve those issues for the residents. So at this time, we do have a preliminary estimated project cost. It's a budget number. And for the total project, right now it's estimated at $1.65 million. That's made up of surface improvements, which is kind of the roadway, the curbing, any earthwork necessary, storm sewer improvements, and then sanitary and water improvements. And the reason we list that out here is, as we'll go through here as we continue to talk about financing, is the assessments. We break out the surface improvements and the storm sewer improvements or drainage improvements, because those are assessable per the city's assessment policy at 50%. So let's talk briefly about the assessment policy. For a project of this scope, as I mentioned, the costs associated with the surface and stormwater improvements are assessed at 50%. There's no assessment for the costs associated with any water main work or sanitary sewer work. Those costs are funded by the city's funds for that particular type of work. All properties within the project area are assessed on a per parcel basis. So each parcel or your property is assigned one unit, and there'll be one assessment for your parcel. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that also will be broken out by project area and or street. There is some language in the assessment policy as well as the state statute regarding if you have a hardship, you may have an opportunity for a deferral. And we can get more into that if you do believe you're in that category and have questions about it. You can start with me or go directly to Brian Grimm, our city finance director, or really any one of us staff will get you to the right person to talk about a hardship deferral if you fall in that category. Typically, in years past, we've done a payment period of 20 years for the assessment, and we'll talk more about this. This meeting tonight is more about getting information from the residents, and there will be an assessment hearing. Provide letters and more information on this. But if you have questions about that payment period and how it goes on your taxes, you can speak with myself or Brian Graham again, City Finance Director. So we're gonna leave this slide up for a little while because there's quite a bit to look at here, but Mayor Whalen mentioned that we'd provide a range when she introduced the presentation here tonight, and we've got that up on the slide here. And let's start with looking at the top right. We've got our historical assessment rates for the 2020 project, which is has just wrapped up down on Lakeview Drive, Shady Lane, Margaret Circle. That was about $7,800 per unit. And the 2019 assessment was about $8,500 per unit. And these assessments are varied. They vary and they're impacted by a number of variables. Some important ones are lot density. If you have a street that has a bunch of houses really close by, there's more people that can share in the cost of rebuilding that street. If you have them pretty far apart, you've got larger lots, there's less people that can share in the cost. And so it does, that does affect the assessment rate. Of course, the scope of work, when we talk about if bituminous curb is implemented or concrete curb, obviously concrete curb has a lot more work associated with it and would be more expensive. And then of course, these numbers are estimates at this time based on historical information and understanding of the project. It really matters when we go to bid this project in the late winter, early spring, what contractors are bidding on this and what the bidding climate looks like. So ultimately, it's what the bid prices come in at when this project is bid. So let's look to the left on our graph here. 2020 and 2019, those assessment rates that I discussed, are highlighted on there with the stars kind of showing where they landed on this graph. We do have preliminary estimates based on lot density, scope of work, and historical bid prices. In the blue, you can see that's implementing bituminous curb as needed and only having concrete curb where it's warranted next to storm sewer facilities. So you can see that work is kind of trending towards the left there. So for hard scrabble, Loring, and Stonebridge, right now the range is from $6,500 per unit to $8,000 per unit. And Minneapolis Avenue is $5,500 to $7,000 per unit. If we go and look at putting concrete curb throughout or a majority of the areas, either for the desire of the neighborhood or as needed, as we determine the design of these streets, then the costs shift to the more expensive side. For hardscrabble, Loring, and Stonebridge, it goes approximately from $8,500 to $10,000. And one caveat there is hardscrabble is included because of its geographical location, but it's very, very unlikely that concrete curb would be warranted in hardscrabble because of the nature of that road having ditches on both sides. So that's kind of a caveat. It's included in that range, but there's a chance that hardscrabble would have to get pulled out of that range. And then with Minneapolis Avenue, you can see that increases from to $7,500 to $9,000 per unit. And again, I'll reiterate, this necessarily isn't about how these assessments work. We're going to get into the question and answer period where we hear from residents, and that's really what's important. But this is some preliminary information on the assessment ranges. So real briefly, how does this number get tightened up, and when is an actual number provided to residents? So the City Council will authorize the preparation of a feasibility report and preliminary design, or they did, excuse me, on September 21st. The consultant, we've got a crew out performing topographic survey, and that gathers data for the design. We work on the preliminary design, and what we do is calculate a detailed preliminary construction cost based on all that data: resident feedback, topographic survey information, field visits, and proposed work, and then the utility conditions. Combine that all into a opinion of probable cost for the project, and then we include that assessment rate, the preliminary assessment rate, in the feasibility report that is presented to the City Council on November 16th. So right now you are at the neighborhood meeting. Here's the project schedule as we go forward. I mentioned accepting the feasibility report. Actually, I think we have the wrong date there. This is the correct date, the December 7th. So that would be when the feasibility report's presented to the council. Then we'd have the public hearing. Residents would receive an invite to that public hearing. And at that point, the council would listen to resident feedback if there was any. And then they have the option to order the preparation of plans and specifications. We'd work on design over the winter and then present the bid package out to contractors to bid on. And we'd open those bids on March 9th. And then we'd work towards ordering an assessment hearing where you would have another chance to speak to the council directly about the assessments. And at that point, we would have the actual assessment calculation based on the bids. We'd go forward with accepting the project, awarding the contract, and then construction would begin in June. And we'd be working into October to complete the project. I'm on the left there, Adam, member of the project team here. My contact information is there, is in the letter you received as well. And I'd be your first point of contact for any questions. I've heard from a number of you already. We're about to get to the question and answer. Allison Fauski's listed there as well as the city engineer, and there's her information. And so we'll be your main points of contact going through from preliminary design now all the way through to construction and through construction in 2021. So we've got to the portion of the presentation where we'd love to hear from folks. And before we do that, if you have a chance now to type in your question and answer. I haven't been following along if we've received any yet, but please type that in or raise your hand and so you can get in line for presenting your question. I've received a number of questions and so has city staff prior to this meeting, which we're pleased about. Getting that communication started early. A lot of it has to do with drainage concerns, and as I tried to present here in this, when talking about the drainage for the area, we will be looking into those items. One particular one is that area on Hardscrabble Road North, where there's a low point. It's a pretty steep road. There's water that makes it to the low point, and then it kind of doesn't have anywhere to go, and it does actually affect some private property on either side. And so we're looking at addressing that drainage issue. We've had some questions about Loring Drive. There's issues with the cul-de-sac way up at the end, and that cul-de-sac's causing some drainage issues on a private property there. And so we're going to be looking at adjusting the cul-de-sac a little bit so that it drains actually in the other direction, so that we can address that issue. Also on Loring Drive, we've heard from a couple residents about concrete curb and gutter. And so we have heard that, at least from a couple residents, that the desire would be to have concrete curb and gutter there for drainage and also for just the usability and performance of the roadway. We haven't received too many questions from the Stonebridge area, so if we have residents from there, we'd love to hear from you. And then up at Minneapolis Avenue, received a few questions about how the assessments are going to work with Minneapolis Avenue being the street that's being constructed, but Crestridge Court accesses via Minneapolis Avenue. And what we've said at this point is that that is a very valid question. The city has a history with a couple other projects where the road being improved was used by residents that they had to use that road to get to their street. With those instances, the road on Halstead Drive and Game Farm Road was actually changing from gravel to bituminous pavement. So it was slightly different, but still the same concept. And so the answer has been that's a fantastic question. It has to be discussed by the city council, and they'll be making a determination on what sort of benefit do the Crestridge Court folks receive from Minneapolis Avenue being reconstructed. and then they'll look at assessing equitably based on that benefit. And so that's continuing to be a discussion. If you have thoughts on that, you can absolutely put that into your question here tonight. And then we've had some drainage questions along Minneapolis Avenue as well. Quick run through the frequently asked questions, and then we'll get to the Q&A. Driveway access during construction, you will feel the impact of construction. It will be difficult to access at some points, but in general, you will have access to your driveway at the beginning and end of each day. So you will have access to your driveway via vehicle at the beginning and end of each day. If you have trees in the right of way, right up next to the road, there is a chance that those are going to be impacted. If they're in the city right of way, they'll likely be removed. If they're on your yard, but it needs to be removed from the work, which is very unlikely, we'll work with property owners on a case-by-case basis. Sprinkler systems, invisible dog fences, let us know as soon as possible if you have those. Just shoot us an email. Then when we get to construction, we'll ask you to mark those so the contractor can avoid them, but we will repair them if they do get impacted. If you're having if you have special needs or you have a special event plan, communicate with us early so that we can get that on our schedule, make sure the contractor's aware. You will continue to have mail and garbage service throughout construction. You'll likely be on temporary mailboxes, and the contractor will work to move your garbage cans to a location that is accessible by the garbage company. So with that, Lydia, this is where I need your help to work through the question and answers.
Absolutely.
Let me know how that goes.
Yeah, so we'll go through the questions as we receive them in order. So the first question was from Pete Bergland. Will power lines and telephone cable lines be buried on Minneapolis Avenue?
Thank you. That's a great question. I didn't mention it here in the presentation, but we do communicate with what I'm calling the private utility companies, Xcel, CenterPoints, the power and cable companies and gas companies. We communicate with them through design. We actually host a utility coordination meeting where we invite them in to review the plans when they're about 60% complete. We say, hey, this is kind of what we're proposing. You might need to get them out of our way. B, do you have any plans to upgrade them? We ask them if they have plans to upgrade their facilities, and that may be replacing them. If it's a gas company, they like to replace any steel gas main with plastic, so they typically will do that. It's the power company. Sometimes they'll consider moving overhead to underground. A lot of times they aren't, or they don't plan on doing that. And so what I would say is if you would like to see that, I would contact your utility company and let them know that. We can reiterate at the meeting that some residents would like to see it done and communicate that with them. We cannot require them to kind of move overhead to underground as part of this project. So we'll take the next question.
Thanks, Adam. The next question is from Eric S. Will the residents on Minneapolis Avenue vote on what kind of curb we want, or is it determined by the drainage needs?
Great question. The curb is absolutely dependent on the drainage needs, but that's not to say that it can't be added for other reasons as well. And I should have mentioned before we started the Q&A that we do have our panelists. And typically when we do this in person, there is, you're able to read the room and see if the panelists want to speak up. So if there's anyone on the council, Mayor Whalen, or council members or city staff, at this time it's kind of informal, and if they want to join in and help with these questions, that feel free to do so. But for the curb, it's going to be a continued conversation. In Minneapolis, there are obviously homes that on the south side go downhill towards the lake. And what we don't want to have is drainage coming off the roadway and onto people's private property. And so we need to convey that in some way. So curb and gutter is one way to do that. There's obviously bituminous curb or concrete curb. And what we're leaning towards right now is that concrete curb is going to be the preferred method to address the drainage issue on the south side of Minneapolis Avenue. And from what we're hearing from some residents is that it is important to them that that gets installed. So ultimately the council will discuss that, hear resident feedback, and determine which direction we go, because that curb cost is shared by the city and the residents. And so I guess I'll leave it open right now, and if anyone on the council or Madam Mayor or any city staff want to add on to that.
Staff, Gary, any input?
This is Shannon. Mr. Gabois, can you talk just briefly about the difference between bituminous curb and gutter and concrete curb and gutter, and the benefits of one over the other? Does one do a better job of controlling the runoff than the other?
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Bruce. So they'll both convey drainage and keep it off of the yards, which is key. One is considerably less expensive, and that's bituminous curb, but it does, I mean, we have a lot of it in the city of Minnetrista. It is an effective way to accomplish what we need to accomplish in terms of drainage and in terms of keeping that edge of pavement from kind of eroding away over time if it goes right into the grass. But there is a sturdier and hardier option, which is concrete curb. So bituminous curb it performs fine. It doesn't have as long as of a life, because of what happens is maybe plow trucks or garbage trucks or people's vehicles drive up on that and maybe beat it up over time. And so there is a longevity concern, or difference, I should say, not necessarily concern, but definitely a longevity difference. But of course, that comes with the cost implications. The concrete curb, it looks nice. It is 5,000 PSI, high strength. What it does do typically, though, is if we do employ concrete curb, it takes up more space on the roadway. So as I mentioned when we first started this presentation, we're not planning to change street widths or geometry. If you add concrete curb, you can be taking up 1.5 feet or 1.5 feet of concrete on either side. You'd still have about 1 foot of drivable lane, but you can, in essence, shrink up the road a little bit, because we don't plan to widen the roads any further and impact yards any further, and make the impervious area any larger. And so that's kind of pros and cons to both of those things. And at previous neighborhood meetings, we have discussed with residents, and council has gotten an idea of, okay, this street really wants concrete curb. Let's propose that in the feasibility report and look at what the assessments are going to be. So, Councilmember Bruce, if that answers your question or provides enough information, let me know. And if there's anyone else that wants to speak on it.
Gary Peters has his hand
Yes, it does. Thank you.
I can unmute him.
Yes,
He'll need to unmute himself on his end as well.
Perfect.
Gary? Uh-oh.
I can faintly hear him.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. It's still a little light, Gary.
Gary, Public Works here. Madam Mayor, Council, I'm just going to put my 2 cents in here for concrete curb and on Minneapolis Avenue, especially down the south side. With the number of driveways that you're going to have, there are people going in and out of their driveways over bituminous curb will not last. A concrete curb is a 50-year solution to this area, and anywhere you get 50 years out of concrete curb. You're going to be lucky to get half that with bituminous. I mean, it's just not going to last. They break off with plowing. They get run. You know, they wear away after the years. But with the amount of driveways, especially on the south side, everything pretty much slopes down towards the lake. You're going to want a surmountable curb through there to control the water flow, to make it easy for people to get in and out of their driveways. It's going to last a long time, and it's just so much better, and it'll last forever. More bang for your buck. Yes, it's cost up front, but you're going to get 50 years out of that curb.
Adam, this is Mike Molitor. Can you hear me?
Yes, thanks, Mike.
As in past projects, I've been a big proponent of concrete curb. I know it's a cost issue, but I think Gary's point is well taken. One thing that hasn't been mentioned that I would like to describe is that a concrete curb can actually help the road surface itself by protecting the edge and keeping the edge from being deteriorated as cars are driven over. Anybody who's walked along these streets can see along the edge that the asphalt starts to disappear, and that's from trucks and cars driving over it. So the curb kind of helps to keep the edge to the road. And also, Adam, you might just, for reference for those who probably aren't quite as familiar with street projects, describe what type of concrete curb that is. We're talking, I believe this is a B-style curb, not a D-style curb, which is more common in suburban areas versus urban. But you may want to just elaborate so people understand what we really mean by a concrete curb in this case, if you could.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Molitor. Great points about the kind of durability of concrete curb and bituminous curb and getting driven over, and this kind of supporting the edge of the pavement there. As far as the type of concrete curb, I wish I could just Google it really quick and show you guys some pictures, but what Councilmember Molitor mentioned there was there's a barrier style curb, which if I could draw it, has a back to it. And so if you were driving next to it, you'd kind of bump into it with your tire and you wouldn't be able to get up and over it very easily. The other option is a D-style curb or a surmountable curb. And if you look at the new developments in Minnetrista, we go with a surmountable curb, which is more of an S shape. And so you kind of, your vehicle's tires would roll up and over it. And so both would function well in terms of what our Public Works Superintendent, Gary Peters, was talking about in terms of collecting that drainage and stopping it from going down onto people's properties. But there's just that difference in usability in terms of a barrier where you wouldn't be able to drive up and over, or you wouldn't want to, and then a surmountable.
And Adam, I'll add here, we would likely be considering surmountable. The other type is more like what you would see in a very urban situation like Minneapolis. The advantage of a surmountable curb is that, especially along these lakeside areas where you see a lot of tear downs and people want to change the location of the driveway, it makes it a lot easier to change the location of the driveway because you don't have to have a new curb cut.
Great point, great point. And I think Gary raised his hand as well if he wants to chime in on those comments.
No, I had chimed in before, but I agree with everything. That's exactly it. The extra edge support is very important too, because everything that drives down there, the garbage trucks, everything, the buses all run down that shoulder. So just having that extra edge support is just so important.
Any other comments on concrete curb and gutter? I mean, we can transition into some of the other areas. Lydia, if there is any questions about that you've seen, we could jump to those. If not,
Adam, if I could, Adam, this is Mayor Whalen.
yes.
If I could make a comment regarding the question about the electrical lines being buried. Many years ago, we did a project on Maple Crest, and the residents there unanimously wanted the power lines to be buried. The electrical company was not going to do that for free, and the city said if all of the residents are interested in that, they would be assessed 100% for that cost. But again, there's far fewer people to try and all get on board with, and then that cost was assessed to the property owners. Just kind of FYI regarding the electrical lines.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Beneficial information for the residents.
There is one other question that we've received on curbs, and the question is, are mountable curbs an option in the concrete category?
Perfect, and thank you, Lydia. It looks like our city engineer, Allison, has shared her screen. I hope folks can see that. And she's detailed the two types. I don't know if Allison, if you wanted to jump in, but I can take it too, that B style curb, a barrier high back curb, is on your right, where it's got the, like Councilmember Mauder was saying, is more of an urban type curb. And then you can see on the left, you've got that surmountable where you see a kind of a ramp. You'd be able to drive up nice and easily over that. And this does show a driveway as well. And you can see that, to his point, with the reconstruction that does occur along the lakeside there, a driveway can meet into any location on the back of curb. So to answer that specific question, either of these can be considered for the scenario. I think the city's preference would be to go with the surmountable.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.
So if we're returning to other questions, if no one else has any other curb comments from the city staff or council, the next question will be from Lee G. I'm going to unmute you on our end, Lee. You'll have to unmute yourself as well. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Lee George, and I'm here with my wife. We're at 5840 Hardscrabble, and we're delighted that you're going to repave Hardscrabble Circle.
Did we lose?
We're on a low point on the east side of the circle, and we get a lot of drainage. And in previous years, we had flooding of our property, but we rebuilt here in 2016, 2017, and put in a good drainage system so that we haven't had any problems since then. I guess rather than a question, more of a concern. There is a culvert that goes under Hardscrabble that drains into a wetland that we share with our neighbor. And I just want to make sure that we don't have increased drainage from the central area into our property with your new storm surge. We've been happy with what improvements we made. I just want to make sure we don't overwhelm that system.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Lee. I did get some history on your property and the drainage concerns there. The culvert that runs underneath Hardscrabble and then empties out onto your property. And I'm glad what you guys have employed is working. We are going to assess the condition of that culvert, and perhaps once I've finished up here, Gary Peters can talk to it at that point a little bit if he has seen it recently. So we'll definitely look at the condition of that culvert and make sure that from a structural integrity standpoint, it doesn't need to be replaced. We don't anticipate any need to upsize that culvert. From my understanding, it's rather large already. And then in terms of increasing drainage to that location, we would not anticipate increasing any drainage. We'd be permitting all this work through the watershed district, and we need to meet certain requirements in terms of rate and volume of drainage leaving the construction site. And so we're held by our permit to not increase those. And so we definitely appreciate you letting us know about your concern, and we should have no issue addressing that concern as we go forward with the design.
Good, thank you. Please feel free to call me if you have any questions.
Perfect. Yeah, and you as well. And I think I've mentioned that to the residents, is if you aren't able to get to your question tonight or just couldn't think of it yet, you can reach out to us at any time, call us, email us, and we can also make time to meet out on site and take a look at your particular concern. So
just let me know when you want to meet. I'll be here.
Perfect.
Thank you, Lee. I'm putting you back on mute. All right, so back to some of the questions that have come in. The next one in order is, what is the plan to improve drainage on Minneapolis so it does not drain into yards? If curb and gutter is installed, how will the driveways be adjusted to match the grade while still maintaining flow away from the yards?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for that question. With the curb being installed, if it is proceeded that way with design, there will be a need to remove a portion of each driveway, let's say in general 5 to 10 feet, and replace that in kind and make sure that it matches well with the new curb. The new curb would try to meet as closely as possible to the existing edge elevation, but it cannot be exact. And so there will be some adjustment on each driveway, and those are the driveways that do go down away from the roadway. So there'd be adjustment at the driveway and then adjustment along the yards as well. So there would be either some minor cutting of the yards, or in more likely a little bit of filling behind the curb to meet in gently and nicely with the existing yards. So that's how we'd match in on the back side of the curb. On the front side, the curb has what we call a flow line, and that's a recessed portion of the curb. It's really the lowest portion of the curb, and that's what carries the drainage. And so we wouldn't be concerned with that necessarily overtopping the curb and draining onto the yards.
Thanks, Adam. The next question from Walt L. Will there be any attempt to keep new road on the public right-of-way and off private property, specifically Minneapolis Avenue?
Yeah, great question. So when we put together the plans and specifications, we look at the geometry of the roadway. Again, we're not planning to change it. And so that being said, we wouldn't plan to widen it or change the alignment so that it goes onto private property. At this time in design, I'm not aware of an area where we have a right-of-way concern with the city public right-of-way, where the road maybe isn't on it, at least on Minneapolis Avenue. But we would review that as we go forward with design and look at that and see if it's something that needs to be cleaned up. We have kind of jumped into another area of the project. There is that exact scenario on Hardscrabble Road, or Hardscrabble Circle, excuse me. The road doesn't necessarily follow how the right-of-way is platted. So we'll be working with the Nature Conservancy to obtain an easement so that the road actually follows within an easement granted to the city for a roadway. And we'll also be vacating part of the right-of-way that is over a swamp. So we look at those items. I'm not aware currently of issues like that on Minneapolis Avenue.
Walt L. submitted another question. Will the walk paths along the street be repaved?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Will the walking paths along the street be repaved? Oh, and you know what? It looks like Walt just raised his hand, so I may let him ask his own question.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure where. Thank you. Yeah.
You'll need to unmute yourself on your end as well.
All right. There I go. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you well.
Excellent. So I don't want to talk forever here, but the three issues before me, there's a walking path that connects Minneapolis Avenue to Grandview Avenue, which was put in, that for the most part is pretty good, but there are a few spots within it that are that have settled significantly, causing water to stagnate on top of the asphalt, and as such it's continuing to fail. The other path connects the very end of Minneapolis Avenue with Bayside. These paths, with the advent of the development of the Red Oak development and no real good place to walk within a neighborhood short of going on a county road, are used heavily now. And so if you're going to repave the street, I would propose that you at least look at those walking paths, because there is extensive use of them today. Second issue, if I'll just throw them, if you want me to throw them out, or you want to address that?
Yeah, well, I'll address it, and that way we can keep track. That's a great question, and we'll look internally as staff. At this point, those trails have not been discussed, but it's an excellent point that those do get used. We're aware of those being used, and I think that internally as staff and council, we should talk about the opportunity to improve those as needed when we're in here improving Minneapolis Avenue. So thank you for that question / comment.
All right, very good. As
I'll
you've
just
already
be in here
alluded,
real quick, Walter. So that would be That's information that's really valuable to the council. In those kind of things, we could actually improve with park dedication funds. So that would be a good time to take a look at. Thank you, Walter.
All right, thank you. I think the expense there is minimal, to be honest. They don't need very much.
Yeah.
So, but they are heavily used with the advent of, or the development of Red Oak. So, on the second issue, I won't need to discuss it any further. You've already hit on it. There are a number of significant water drainage issues along the entire roadway of Minneapolis Avenue. I can think offhand that at least 4 or 5 different locations where we have what I term to be significant water issues. I'm just delighted to hear that you're going to address them or attempt to deal with them in some way. So enough said there. And then lastly, I posed the question about keeping the roadway off of private property. The last 5 homes on Minneapolis Avenue are only on a 16 foot wide alley. As such, about 3 feet of the asphalt as it currently stands is on my property, and likewise with a number of others here at the very end of the street. If you go beyond that, those last 5 homes towards the County Road 19, the remainder of the right-of-way is about a 30 foot wide right-of-way. There's plenty of room for the street. It's not currently utilizing its current width of the right-of-way. So you got lots of room for curb and gutter, so on and so forth. But there are constraints at the very end due to the width of the right-of-way. So just want to bring that to your attention.
Yes, thank you very much. Yep, I did pull up the plat map while you were talking there. Yet we will definitely look at that. Typically, with the street having a roadway there that's utilized as a public street and it's maintained by the city, we will talk internally. We'll make sure to review this, but we likely wouldn't do much in terms of changing or replatting the area, but we will definitely look into that further and communicate that with the residents that are affected, or if they will be affected.
All right, thank you very much. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thanks, Walt. I'm going to put you back on mute. Right. Our next question comes from Jenny B. Why is there no parking on Minneapolis Avenue? Can that be modified?
Gary Peters. I think first and foremost, it's very narrow, but I'll let Gary speak to that because he manages the no parking areas or helps with that and manages the signage on those streets. So
as long as I've been here, it's been no parking. I believe it was an ordinance that was passed many years ago because of probably for fire and safety issues to get people in and out. Madam Mayor, you might have a little bit of more, thought on that. You might have been here when they did that.
I think that was before my time as well, Gary. So I don't recall. Yeah. Like you said, a long time ago.
I know there is an ordinance actually in there for that. I know it was passed.
So we would have a resolution. I think we'd have a resolution if we wanted to go back and look for that. Gary, do you think?
I'm sure it was many, many years ago. I believe we looked it up and we were looking for something else, and I believe we did find something on that along with the speed limits we were looking at that time. So, but it's been that way for a long time.
Do you have any thoughts initially right now about if it should maintain that way? I know it's a narrow area. It's a one way in, one way out, so it can make turning around difficult as well.
Well, I don't know if I'd want, if you get parked up, and I don't know if fire trucks have a hard time making it through there if there'd be too parked up. I don't know. To me, I would say it that way. I think you should probably leave it, but that's that would be up to the police chief. Really, would be the one to ask about that and the safety issue along with the fire chief.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from Kenneth S. The west side of Minneapolis is very narrow. Will this part of the roadway be widened?
And I'm assuming, thank you, Kenneth, the portion that was just being spoken about by Walt narrows up there as it approaches the small turnaround and that trail access. And in general, the answer would be no, there's not plans to widen that area. I think it's going to play into this conversation about why was there a no parking ordinance, and we do communicate, or we'll plan to communicate with the police chief about access and whether or not it, from an emergency access standpoint, would warrant a widening. That would prove difficult because of the conversation that Walt mentioned about the plat being narrow there and they're not being platted right away. If the road were to expand, it would be a more complicated process of needing to obtain right away there. So definitely something we'll look into, but at this point, the streets are not planning, we're not planning to widen the streets.
Thank you. Next question comes also from Kenneth. With the regrind, I believe the reclaim of the pavement, does that mean no new base will be installed to ensure long life of the new roadway?
Great question. It does not mean that no new base will be installed. When they do reclaim that pavement, we perform gradations and compaction tests on it. We make sure that it meets the requirements and specifications for a class 5 material, which is what you would expect, or you'd see for base in other areas, under driveways and under roadways that are utilized. So it will meet the specifications of new class 5 as well. What we do is we have corings of the roadway, and we can estimate how much material is going to be available to be reused. And many times we have to include, we have to plan for them hauling in some material as well. And so there may be some new material, but even that material that's imported would have been recycled at one point. So it's very typical to use recycled material on these projects. We do monitor them to make sure that they're meeting the right specifications to perform or construct a road that, that meets the specifications. So.
Thanks, Adam. The next question comes from Claudette. Lumping Stonebridge, Hardscrabble, and Loring together, does that mean the per unit assessment is the same without regard to the local scope of work on curb selection?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So that plays into what those unit assessments are going to be. So as we work with the city council and staff and residents to determine if and which streets are going to get concrete curb, then the assessments will have to vary. If Loring certainly wants concrete curb, but Hardscrabble isn't going to have concrete curb, then there should not be a joining of the costs for that concrete curb for a street that isn't getting the concrete curb. So that will absolutely be separated as we go forward with design. Good question.
All right, the next question, we'll jump out of order a little bit just to make sure that it gets answered quickly. From Sandra, will this Zoom recording be made available for those who are unable to attend starting at 5?
Let's see, so we'll have the recording available, and we're gonna pass it to our administration, and they'll be the ones uploading it to the city website. So I would say for sure tomorrow, not necessarily this evening, but for sure tomorrow it'll be available for review.
Thanks, Adam. Right, the next question from Kenneth, will new city water be installed as part of this project for the areas that have well water?
That's a great question. At this time, there's no plans to extend city water to any of the areas where city water does not currently exist with this project.
Right, and so far we just have 2 questions left. The next one, with concrete curbs, would curb cuts be installed?
We That's a great question. We would potentially use curb cuts at if you guys recall back to the presentation, we talked about some drainage features such as rain gardens. Curb cuts can be utilized in those situations. The difficulty with curb cuts is the water leaves the roadway and it needs to go somewhere. So that would need to be heading down a city right away in order for that to work, or a dedicated swale. So there's a potential for it, but that's not the main design plan. Would not be to use a whole number of curb cuts. Good question.
Right. And this is currently the last question, unless others come in. From Sandra, hard scrabble circle floods each spring. Will this be addressed with the road rework?
I would wonder if they're talking about a specific location, and if they were, Sandra, maybe assuming that talking about the west side of hard scrabble circle close to that existing wetland and pond. And if not, you may be talking about somewhere else. I'd love to have you follow up with a specific area. I don't know that the entire roadway is flooding, but we do have public works staff that go and assist with these issues when they do happen, and we meet with them to talk about where these localized drainage issues are occurring. And again, we will review the site from a topography standpoint and look at the hydraulics. And so we will run a model to look at where the low points are and what sort of volumes we're seeing. So I would say, as a general state answer to that question, yes, we will be looking at that. And if there's an opportunity, specifically with hard scrabble, that is a narrow roadway, but it does have some semblance of ditches on either side. So there's likely an opportunity to do some grading to address those drainage issues. So we will look at those. Hopefully that answers your question, but if you did want to follow up with some specifics, please do so. And then Lydia, if we have some more, we can get to them. But I'll say that we'll pass it over back to Mayor Whalen at some point here, and just see if we want to close things up or wait for some more questions to come in. The council and city staff do have a
Adam, if we have a few more minutes here, okay. So if we have additional, I think we should give the opportunity to our residents to ask those questions. That's what we're here for. So are there any more questions?
There's currently one more question that has been unanswered, also from Kenneth. Why did it take so long to consider resurfacing a Minneapolis Avenue? It has been in terrible shape for a while.
Yeah, thank you, Kenneth. That's a great question. So as I discussed earlier, the city's got a capital improvement plan, and we look at all of these streets, we look at their conditions, and city staff work with council and base it on resident concerns, as well as what's the condition of the utilities in those streets. And we try to plan these improvement projects to kind of check off all those boxes in a timely manner that's going to be cost effective for the city, and that is going to solve issues for the residents. And so since my time here at Minnetrista, that's been our goal, is to do that in the most efficient way possible. We know that Minneapolis, as well as Hardscrabble and even Loring and Stonebridge, have been in poor shape for some time, and we've been working forward with the goal of getting to these streets, and we're looking forward to the fact that we're here now, and that we're going to be working on the design, and in the next year, this time next year, we'll be looking at some reconstructed streets, and those folks that have lived there for a while and dealt with this really rough condition, they're.
Adam.
Go ahead, Meryl. Yep.
Yeah. Adam, I'll just weigh in a little bit here. This is Mayor Whalen again. One of our constraints, of course, besides what Adam was saying, is our dollar amounts. And what happened so one good example is last year, we were thinking of doing Hardscrabble this year in 2020, but we had to postpone it because we had some utility issues over there on Lakeside and Margaret Circle. And doing those utilities and not doing the road at the same time just financially didn't make a lot of sense. So therefore, we had to push Hardscrabble and Loring and Stonebridge back a year. However, having said that, initially we were looking at Hardscrabble only, but now that we have additional funding, we decided to get reimbursed, to seek reimbursement for another project that we did several years ago. And with that with those reimbursement dollars, we are now able to do Minneapolis, Hardscrabble, Loring, and Stonebridge all at once rather than in multiple years. So that infusion of those, it's called municipal state aid dollars, have come to the city. We'll be able to do more roads this year.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for adding that.
We have not received any other questions or hand raises.
Thank you. Any other comments from staff or council or questions that council may have?
This is Councilmember Molitor.
This is Shannon Bruce.
I would like to.
Mr. Molitor, go ahead.
I just want to elaborate a little bit more on the timing. I also want to add that as people have driven around the city of Minnetrista, there are a number of other streets too that are also in poor condition. Morning View comes to mind, and I know there's a number of others. So the list is long and the money is short. So obviously it'd be nice to get these things done sooner rather than later, but we have to prioritize, and that's kind of how we got here, in addition to the other factors. So it's not obviously that we're not aware, it's just there's only so much money. So I just wanted to make sure that people are aware of that as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Molitor. Ms. Bruce?
Thank you. I just had a question about the curb and gutter costs. If any of them would be able to come out of, could we use any of the curb and gutter costs and apply those to our storm water fund and take the money out of our storm water fund? Is that precluded from construction costs, from being used for construction costs?
I don't personally, this is Adam, I don't personally have the right now. I don't know if Brian Kim or Mike Roney or Gary Peters would want to chime in if they had some thoughts initially. If you do, appreciate it. If not, we can look into that. But to me, it's defined as a surface improvement cost. But if any one of those staff members had some thoughts to share, we could try to answer that question, Mrs. Bruce.
Yeah, it just seems like the purpose is for stormwater runoff, and that's what the fund is for. But we can talk about that at a council meeting or after the feasibility study.
I don't know that
we should talk about it.
I don't know that there's anything specifically that would preclude us from using those funds for that purpose. But again, that would just be a council decision, and we'd have to talk about that a little bit. All right, any other questions?
One more question has come in, if there's time.
Sure, go ahead.
So this is from an anonymous attendee. Based on the cost impact to the city, shouldn't the Met Council and Lennar share the cost for repairs since they caused so much damage over the past 5 years?
Lennar, and okay, could we get an explanation of the question, please?
Maybe as they're typing, Lydia, Lennar did Red Oak, and perhaps just with the proximity there to Minneapolis, they wouldn't have been using it really as any for trucking or anything like that.
Yeah, Lennar didn't use, or it's not, they wouldn't have used Minneapolis Avenue. Probably development, they had to pay, I think it was $135,000 to help improve Grandview Avenue. And I don't know, and the Met Council didn't really have anything to do with the Red Oak development, other than their requirement for density. Does that answer the question?
I don't see any follow-up question or hand raises, so I think
If they
it
don't,
looks
yeah, they can always reach out. Again, it looks like something just popped up, but they can reach out personally on that question as well. If we
it
didn't answer.
says their trucks caused damage to Stonebridge and L-Ring. That must be
Loring.
Loring.
Yes, thank you, Lydia. Sure, with the recent project, must be referring to. I would say that, you know, those streets were in kind of poor shape, and the city wouldn't pursue reimbursement from those other entities, you know, that used the county right away to do a project for that. Typically, we wouldn't pursue any reimbursement from the city or from other entities on that. So if we don't have any further questions, Mayor Whalen, if you wanted to close the meeting, adjourn the meeting as it is a work session.
Thank you. Yeah, since this is a work session, the City Council meeting was called to order. So in order to close the meeting, we do need a motion to close the meeting and a second. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
One of our
Councilmember
council
Molitor.
members will have to weigh in. Okay, Mr. Molitor made that motion. Is there a second?
Shannon Bruce, I'll second.
Okay, and Ms. Bruce seconded that. Those in favor will signify with aye. Molitor, how do you vote?
Aye.
And Ms. Mortensen, how do you vote? We can't hear you. Okay, we'll go on to Mr. Chumperland. How do you vote?
Aye.
And Ms. Bruce, how do you vote?
Aye.
Okay, and I vote aye. So I know we have a quorum, or we have a majority here. I'm assuming Ms. Mortensen is voting aye, but you'll have to weigh in later. So I'm going to call it. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating.
Around.
Thank you.